Thanks very much, everyone. Today I'm joined by the Health Minister, Roger Cook, the Police Commissioner and the Chief Health Officer. We've all come from a meeting of the State Disaster Council and we have a number of important updates to detail to you all. On the 11th of April this year, Western Australia experienced our last community transmission case of COVID-19. That was 202 days ago. That is 6 months and 19 days without a single community case of COVID-19 in Western Australia. That is an incredible achievement, one every Western Australian can be proud of. It's because of the efforts of everyone that we got to a COVID normal way of life, faster than nearly anywhere else on the planet. When we needed to, we stayed home. Businesses closed, schools closed, local sports stopped, and elective surgery was put on hold. We all took the health advice seriously, and then behind our hard border, we began to safely ease restrictions within our state to open up our economy. This resulted in a strong economic and social recovery, unique to Western Australia. Our economy is once again the engine room of the nation, and Western Australians are back to work with confidence. Back on the 2nd of April this year, about 7 months ago, I announced we would be putting in place a hard border. That significant and unprecedented announcement came just 8 days after our initial border controls first came into effect on the 24th of March. You will remember at that point in time, things were evolving at an extremely rapid pace, hour by hour. We needed to think quickly and act even quicker. Our border controls have always been about reducing the spread of COVID-19 in WA and protecting our state to keep Western Australia safe and strong. Back in April, I called on all West Australians to pull together and fight this COVID-19 battle as one. We knew that our state's isolation was our best defence. So we took the opportunity and did the unthinkable. We closed our border. We turned WA into an island within an island, and it worked. Back then, I talked about how our hard border gave us the opportunity to take a different direction to the rest of the country and the rest of the world. How it gave us the best chance of combating the virus and minimising the spread throughout our community. I stand here today so proud of the West Australian world-leading response, but so grateful for the commitment shown by so many people to pull through and get to this point. The wider WA community responded to this with true West Australian spirit. I'd like to thank everyone out there who's worked or continued to work on protecting our border and keeping us safe. Our staff at border checkpoints, our health clinicians, our nurses, our port workers, hotel quarantine workers, and our West Australian police, who have had to manage the exemption process. Everyone who has served our state, I'd like to say thank you. And that also goes to our friends and family over east, who have had to wait to get back to WA to visit their families. I understand the frustration and the stress the hard border can cause. It's something that I've not taken lightly. As I've said before, my own parents and my brother live in New South Wales. It's been extremely difficult, like many people, not knowing when I'd be able to see them again. I thank everyone for their understanding and patience along this pandemic journey. West Australia's hard border has and will only ever be in place to protect the health of all Western Australians. I cannot stress that enough. Throughout this pandemic, we have maintained a cautious, considered and careful approach based on Western Australia's expert health advice. We have always been guided by the Chief Health Officer, and it has served us well as we have embarked on our own unique recovery, best suited to Western Australia. Based on that health advice and the rates of local infection in the eastern states, we are now at the next step of our journey to safely transition from our hard border to a new controlled interstate border. The existing hard border exemption system will be removed and replaced with a controlled interstate border regime established on an updated nationwide health-based threshold. And it will be subject to trigger points being met. I want Western Australians to know that we would not be proceeding down this path unless we had the clear health advice to do so. The time is right, the conditions are right, and I'm very confident our controlled border arrangements strike the right balance. These are safe, steady and sensible steps. Pending latest health advice, effective from 12:01 a.m. on Saturday, November 14, Western Australia's new controlled interstate border will come into effect. However, we will be closely monitoring the situation over east, and if we need to delay this introduction of the controlled border, then we will. We are prepared to delay the introduction of the controlled border right up to the last minute. The Chief Health Officer has recommended a 14-day rolling average of less than 5 community cases in each state and territory be required before progressing to the new border controls. This threshold is currently being achieved in all jurisdictions across the country. Based on the health advice, there will be certain rules in place for states and territories, all depending on their level of risk. Just like we have done previously, like moving exempt Victorian arrivals into hotel quarantine, or when we needed to significantly reduce the number of exemptions available for New South Wales arrivals. From November 14, travellers from all states and territories that are deemed very low risk, that is, no local cases in the previous 28 days, will be permitted to enter WA if they comply with the following conditions. All Perth Airport arrivals will undergo a health screening and temperature test on arrival. They will need to be prepared to take a COVID-19 test at a newly established Perth Airport COVID clinic if deemed necessary by a health clinician. Voluntary asymptomatic testing will also be available for all Perth Airport arrivals if they choose to do so. Arrivals will need to complete a G2G pass declaration, stipulating that they do not have any COVID-19 symptoms and which jurisdictions they've been into in the previous 14 days. All travellers will also receive an SMS health check reminder 1 week into their stay in WA, reminding them to get tested if they have any symptoms. For arrivals by land, they will be met at the border checkpoint for health screening and to have their G2G pass declaration verified. If necessary, they will be referred for COVID testing. The very low-risk jurisdictions currently include Tasmania, Queensland, South Australia, ACT and the Northern Territory. All travellers from states and territories that are deemed low risk, which is less than 5 community cases per day on a 14-day rolling average, will also be permitted to enter WA and will need to comply with all of the above conditions. However, they will also be required to take a COVID-19 test at the airport COVID clinic if deemed necessary by a health clinician, self-quarantine for 14 days in a suitable premise, and present for a COVID-19 test on day 11. These jurisdictions currently include New South Wales and Victoria. In effect, the existing COVID safety rules will continue for people who have recently been in New South Wales or Victoria. These conditions will be subject to a review after 4 weeks. In addition, some travellers can continue to seek an exemption from self-quarantine, like truck drivers, for example, who follow a different set of border arrangements. Based on the public health advice, New South Wales and Victoria remain as a low-risk jurisdiction for now. However, when they reach 28 days of no local cases or are deemed very low risk by the Chief Health Officer, they will move into that category of border control measures. The Chief Health Officer will continue to closely monitor community transmission in other states and territories into the future and will advise the WA Government if any changes to our future border controls are required to keep Western Australians protected. We all know how quickly things can change, and I will say this. I will have no hesitation to reintroduce the hard border if that's what's needed to protect the health of Western Australians. I will be carefully monitoring the situation each and every day to ensure we are ready to adjust our border controls to keep our state safe. It's important to note that failure to follow these directions will be enforceable by law, with penalties ranging from a $1,000 infringement up to a $50,000 fine for individuals. Only the modified 2 square metre rule, with the recent exemptions for some venues, and remote Aboriginal community restrictions will remain in place for the time being within WA. But to be clear, this cautious move to a controlled border does not change the strong and stringent measures we have had in place to protect WA, like hotel quarantine for all international arrivals, strong measures at our ports and hotel quarantine for maritime crew, hotel quarantine for international flight crew, and no change to the 14 days of self-quarantine for New South Wales and Victorian arrivals. Personal responsibility here in Western Australia needs to continue. I'm urging all West Australians to embrace COVID-safe principles. We all need to act responsibly and follow the health advice. That is why we are strongly encouraging all local businesses and venues to update and maintain their COVID safety plans. We'll be consulting with industry and organisations over coming days to ensure appropriate mechanisms and contact registers are ready to be rolled out if necessary. It is up to us all to do the right thing. Wash your hands, keep a safe distance if possible, stay home if you're sick, and get tested if you have symptoms. The virus has not been defeated around the world. Therefore, we must work together to prevent a serious outbreak and not jeopardise the hard work of each and every Western Australian. The worsening second waves around the world and the increasing number of Australians returning home means the numbers of COVID-19 cases in hotel quarantine are at a high level. New Zealand is one country that has community spread under control and has strong border controls in place. Although WA will not be signing up to the one-way travel bubble with New Zealand at this stage, we can take one sensible step. Effective from tomorrow, that is 12:01 Saturday, October 31, exempt New Zealand travellers arriving via other Australian cities will now be directed to self-quarantine for 14 days at a suitable premise. They will also be required to present for a COVID-19 test on day 11 of their arrival in Western Australia. This step forward is based on health advice, and I'm confident that the self-quarantining arrangement gives us that extra layer of protection just in case. However, it's important as a country we do not rush to open our international borders further. I've said this before and I will say it again. The Commonwealth Government must take an extra cautious approach to any changes to our international border. It is our strong international borders that give us the confidence to transition to this controlled interstate border. However, if the Commonwealth Government moves to establish further travel bubbles with other nations, we reserve our right to do what is in the best interest of Western Australia, including reinstating our hard border. We need the rest of the country to stay safe. We're all in this together. As we look around the world, the impacts of the virus are everywhere to be seen. Unnecessary and high-risk moves must be avoided. Now, I understand many West Australians might feel worried about the steps that we are planning to take. I want to reassure those people that these steps to move to a controlled interstate border are based on health advice and are safe and sensible. They are cautious, considered and careful steps. I would not be making this decision unless I thought it was the right step to take. Thank you to all Western Australians for the sacrifices made to keep our state safe and strong throughout this pandemic. We're the envy of the world for so many reasons. We have a long way to go and many challenges still to face. But right now, there's nowhere I'd rather be than here. I'll now hand over to the Health Minister, who has some further announcements to make.
Thank you, Premier. Firstly, to today's update, the Department of Health has reported one new case of COVID-19 in Western Australia overnight. The confirmed case is a female in her 20s who returned to Perth from overseas. She is in hotel quarantine. The state's positive case total is now 767. WA Health is monitoring 46 current active cases. Yesterday, 400 people presented to WA COVID clinics, and there have been 487,990 COVID tests performed in WA. Of these tested, 82,416 were from regional Western Australia. Now to today's announcement. This is yet another significant day for all Western Australians. WA has been one of the safest places in the world for many, many months now, and this has not happened by chance. COVID-19 has not broken out into the community since April 11. Not from our ships, not from our hotels, from our airports, not from our hospitals. It is an achievement we should all be proud of because it has not been easy. It is a credit to every Western Australian, particularly the leadership and expertise of so many unsung heroes who have helped keep you and me, help keep all of us safe. Now we are asking everyone to help us on the crucial next stage of this unpredictable journey. The Chief Health Officer, whose advice has been impeccable, has laid out a path forward for Western Australia. It is a cautious approach that is safe and is sensible. As always, the government will continue to review and act on his advice in the best interests and safety of all Western Australians. I have a couple of parts of today's announcements that I want to focus on. The first is reassurance. We have been planning and preparing for this day. Our health teams are well trained and very experienced in dealing with both the prevention and treatment of COVID-19. They have dealt with this insidious virus in so many different places and in so many different pressure situations. We have contact tracing teams in place, and they are at the ready. These teams are very experienced after helping Victoria during the height of the recent pandemic there. Our hotels are secure, and we continue to test up to 15,000 people a week. Yes, transitioning to controlled borders will be a very different experience. Yes, we will be tested, but we are prepared for the next step. The second thing I want to stress is patience. Part of our role today and in the coming days is to explain clearly to the community how the transition to a controlled border will work. It is new ground for everyone, so I urge patience. There will be a lot happening behind the scenes to make it work. Everyone will need a G2G pass to enter WA, so that will put pressure on computer systems to handle all those applications. Those passes will then need to be processed at the airport. And the health screening of airline passengers may have some inconvenience, and that will put pressure on airport staff, healthcare workers and police. So please, everyone, be patient as we work through this together. We have to put these checks and balances in place to keep WA as safe as possible. It may create some delays in the beginning, but it is better to be safe than sorry. We make no apologies for that. Most of these changes, all going well, will start on November 14. But there will be some immediate changes. For instance, people arriving from Victoria will be treated differently from tomorrow. Based on the continuing low numbers of cases in Victoria, the Chief Health Officer has recommended bringing Victoria into line with other jurisdictions. Victoria will move to the same entry conditions as other states and territories in terms of exemptions from tomorrow. They will still undergo testing and quarantine. My final point is probably the most important. For this to work successfully, we need to remember the basics. Back in March and April, even before the hard border was introduced, there was a fundamental but simple reason why WA remained so safe. We can all remember what it was like then. We did the basics really well. We kept a respectable distance from each other. We practiced good hygiene. Children learned to sing happy birthday twice while washing their hands. All this helped stop the transmission of COVID-19 and, as it happens, the flu as well. But there is no doubt that we have all become more relaxed. That was to be expected and understandable as the threat of COVID decreased in our state. But now it is time to reinforce this behaviour again. We've seen recently in Victoria and more recently in the lockdowns in France and Germany just how quickly this virus can devastate a community. We all need to take personal responsibility if we are going to succeed together. We have to get back to basics. Wash your hands. Practice good hygiene. Observe good physical distancing. Follow COVID safe plans. If you are unwell, do not go to work or school. Get yourselves tested for COVID-19. Do not hesitate to get a COVID test. I cannot stress this enough. We need to get back to the basics again. Keep it simple to keep us all safe. Any questions?
Just to clarify then, Premier, so if you're a West Australian and you go to Queensland to see loved ones or whatever, do you need a G2G to get back in?
That's correct. So if you're coming from another state, you need to adhere to the criteria, whoever you are. And so the changes we're making, as I said in my earlier address, they're very cautious and considered. They're very careful. They're actually a modest change on what's there at the moment. But if you're West Australian and you want to go east, you have to be prepared to comply with exactly the same conditions when you come back.
But obviously not quarantine, and the level of what you fill out as a G2G pass, would it be the same as now to get back into WA or not?
You have to, I can say what's going to be in place. You have to have declaration that you haven't been to New South Wales or Victoria if you're coming from Queensland, South Australia, ACT, NT. You have to detail if you've been unwell. Those sorts of things will be required in the G2G pass.
If people from New South Wales and Victoria choose to come here, they obviously still need to self-quarantine for 14 days, but do they need to meet any exemption criteria, or can they just choose to come?
No, that's the change is basically that they don't have to meet the exemption criteria, but they still have to self-quarantine when they come here, and they still have to be tested at day 11. So that's the change for New South Wales and Victoria. So basically, they have got their rates of infection right down, which is a great thing, but we still are making them self-quarantine when they come here.
So, sorry, maybe I'm not just quite getting it. Can I just check this again? So, the states other than New South Wales and Vic, you'll be able to come to WA, you'll fill in a G, whatever it's called, and it sounds like they'll be given out as long as you say you're not sick. And then when you get here, you won't have to quarantine. So that's the big change, isn't it? You can come to WA from those states, not have to quarantine, whereas New South Wales and Victoria, you'll be able to come to WA but quarantine. That's the change?
It's the removal of the exemptions is the big change. So the rules when you come in from New South Wales and Victoria will still be in place, that you need to self-quarantine. And, you know, I suspect a lot of people over east will say that's very harsh. I expect this will not satisfy many people over east. A lot of the critics will say this isn't good enough. It's a pretty tough measure. You're still required to self-quarantine for 14 days. You still have to get tested. It's a pretty tough measure for 60% of the nation's population. The other states will have to fill out the forms, the G2G pass, make various declarations and assurances, for which if they don't tell the truth, they're subject to a criminal penalty, but they won't be required to self-quarantine when they come to WA.
Just on the G2G passes though, so we've heard so many stories about people that have applied for exemptions and they've had to, you know, show paperwork for mortgages and all this stuff to prove that they can come here. That's all being removed.
The exemptions are being removed. But what we're doing is requiring people from New South Wales and Victoria still to self-quarantine and get tested. And from the other states, still to fill out the G2G pass, make certain declarations that they can be held to. And the main one is whether or not they've been to New South Wales or Victoria in the preceding 2 weeks. So that's a significant change, if you like. So we're going from a hard border to a controlled border. It's still a measure that a year ago you wouldn't have ever dreamt you'd have in place, but it's designed to keep Western Australia safe and secure. It's designed to protect the health of West Australians. It's still an extremely tough measure we have in place.
You were previously reluctant to have any form of a travel bubble while there was still some community spread happening in states. We're still seeing cases being detected in New South Wales. So what's changed?
Well, we got health advice. So the health advice has indicated along this road on a few occasions that at some point in the future, based upon a health standard, we may be able to change from the hard border. That's been the health advice along the road. And in particular, when New South Wales and Victoria, and all the states actually, got down to less than 5 cases per day on a 14-day rolling average. We followed that health advice. The health advice has stood us in good stead. We've now gone, as I said, 6.5 months without any community spread of the virus. I wouldn't be taking these steps unless the health advice was completely clear and unless we were absolutely sure and confident that we're going to protect the health and safety of West Australians, and that is our position. I personally think the biggest threat to the country now is importation of the virus from overseas. Clearly, Britain, Germany, France, United States, parts of Asia, parts of Africa, South America are going out of control. And it is going to cause mass deaths, lots of deaths in all of those places. And what we've got to do is make sure we don't bring it in from overseas. And whether that's very tight controls on maritime arrivals, very tight controls on arrivals by air, that's the main priority for the entire country now. And that's the biggest threat to us all. We have very tight controls, the tightest in the country actually, on all of these things. But you never know when a mistake is going to be made, and you also never know, and I urge against this, and I've urged the Prime Minister on a number of occasions, we have to be very careful about further arrivals internationally. And that's difficult for many of us because, you know, lots of us would love to go and visit family overseas or for business purposes or on holidays or whatever it might be. But the international arrivals is the biggest threat to the state and the country now.
Are you worried that we could see a repeat of the recent New Zealand debacle in regards to people sneaking through the borders through other states to get into Western Australia?
Well, you have to make a declaration. And if you do that, you're subject to criminal sanction. If you're coming from Queensland, South Australia, Tasmania, ACT, Northern Territory, you're subject to criminal sanction. If you're coming from New South Wales or Victoria, you're required to self-quarantine. We've got a whole range of measures in place to guard against that, in particular the G2G system. We've still got police on the borders, police at the airports. All of those things are in place to protect against that. But we're doing everything we can to keep the state safe, and we're taking a careful and cautious approach.
If one of these states that we're opening up to with quarantine-free travel detects a case, for example, Queensland, they had a detection in wastewater recently. If that ends up being a confirmed case, does that mean they're all of a sudden out of the bubble?
No, we'd take health advice on that, and it would depend upon the exact circumstances. So what we've said the whole way along is, with that sort of matter, between now and the 14th of November, we reserve the right not to go to the controlled border.
Are you concerned?
Hold on, can I finish? Between now and the 14th of November, we reserve the right not to go to the controlled border. That is, keep the hard border in place if we're concerned at all. So it's 14 days between now and then that we can pull back from this. Having said that, this change is relatively modest. It is relatively modest. And as I said, lots of other states, and I expect a lot of people and commentators in the East will say this isn't good enough, but we reserve the right in that 14 days. If there is any problems after 14 November, if we find cases springing up in other states or what have you, again, we reserve the right to make further changes, including reinstating the hard border.